to go to a gallery to make my art feel legitimate. And that if I go to the pub and somebody says that they like what I've just done, and I might get a beer, or I might meet a girl that likes what I do, then that's enough.
By the close of the 90s, Banksy had become an important figure on the Bristol art scene. Together with the graffiti artist Inky, he organised Walls on Fire, a landmark event supported by the city in which street artists legally painted over 400 metres of hoardings in Bristol Harbour, while sound systems pumped out hip-hop. A few months later, Banksy painted The Mild Mild West, his first large-scale mural on the side of an abandoned building in the Stokescroft area. The mural soon became an iconic monument to Bristol's local culture.
I've always seen it as being a welcome to Bristol sign. It's actually a reference to a particular party which was broken up by the police, and it's Banksy's protest, if you like, against the police taking on the rave scene. We might be peace-loving, we might just be after a good time, we might be just trying to do our own things, but don't push us too far.
It kind of distilled his aesthetic. Although it was painted freehand, Banksy stenciled his name along the bottom. If you take Walls on Fire as a comparison, he was still painting traditional New York graffiti up to that point. The Mild Mild West made it very clear where he was going from there.
Banksy's direction of travel was away from graffiti and towards a career as a new type of contemporary artist. In 2000, he graduated from the streets with a small exhibition at the Seven Shed restaurant in Bristol. The show, with its canvases painted by an infamous local vandal, attracted the attention of both public and media alike.
Excuse me, madam, see this bit of graffiti here with the two rats there and the rat up there with the propeller? What do you think of it?
I think it's most strange.
Can I just introduce you to the man who actually sprayed that thing? Would you call him a vandal?
Well, I suppose you are being a vandal, really.
Graffiti has taken Banksy to cities across Britain as the original street outlaw, but recently he's moved to London, started accepting commissions, and is now holding a conventional exhibition.
Well, I'm kind of old-fashioned in that I like to eat, you know, so it's always good to earn money. And also, I'm trying to make canvases work better than graffiti can work, because also you can take time on it. Graffiti doesn't always come out the way you like it, because you're rushing, you're panicking or whatever.
Every artist has to develop, and it's time for Banksy to face new challenges.
That show really caught people's imagination. People who didn't know his work went there and thought, wow, this art talks to me, it's radical, it's clever, it's witty, it's got a political point, it's well executed. I know several people who bought pieces there who said it was the first time they'd ever bought any art.
Though exhibiting in galleries and working on commission, Banksy remained active as an illegal artist. His street work no longer belonged to the graffiti scene, but neither was he associated with the contemporary art world. Instead, Banksy was part of a new group of post-graffiti artists who, like Basquiat, Keith Haring and Blake Lerat before them, were experimenting with new forms of unauthorized urban art.
I thought graffiti was going to change the art world, shake everything up, and it didn't do that. It just stayed relatively underground. You know, the most success that graffiti had was working with brands. You know, it didn't really make it into art galleries. It wasn't picked up by collectors. And as I was becoming more and more disillusioned with graffiti, this weird thing called street art started to happen.
Graffiti writers reinvented themselves, and you had people like Cost and Revs who started putting wheat pastes up everywhere with all kinds of messaging. And then you have the emergence of people like Shepard Fairey, who also saw the potential of just like putting posters like rock club announcements or punk announcements.
All of a sudden these little rats started appearing, and more people were doing stickers that weren't based around a skateboard brand. There was Shepard Fairey, there was Bash, there was Foul, Banksy, Os Geminos. People using an opportunity in the street and turning it into their advantage. you know, turning bollards into like missiles and, you know, and it sounds like corny and shit, but it was just something different. There was a bunch of people around the world that were doing something that wasn't graffiti, and at the time it didn't have a name.
The nascent street art movement found a home in Shoreditch, a rundown district in London's East End, where a new underground was thriving.
It was a mixed place where immigrants, people without much money, all could mix. This whole new street scene began to move in. Artists went there of all types because the rent was cheap.
Banksy, now living in London, was a fixture at the Dragon, a small bar tucked away in a side street near the Old Street roundabout that had become the informal headquarters of the street art community.
Dragon Bar was this unique, weird place that was run by a guy called Justin Piggott, who was an ex-junkie, but into art, and it was modelled on like a Lower East Side kind of divey, skateboardy graffiti bar. And at the back of the bar they had this car park, and we used to put parties on there. And because it was just that little bit out of like the beaten track, we'd keep it open all night. You know, we had a license till 11 o'clock and we'd keep it serving booze until 3 o'clock in the morning. And it just became this like weird lawless zone.
It was just like a, you know, a freewheeling kind of madness where, you know, you had, everybody knew each other. You had artists coming in, you had Fail coming into town, Bast, Invader, Shepherd, like all these guys congregated there, and it was an epicenter really of the beginning of the scene.
At that time, Shoreditch and Tower Hamlets and Hackney, they were the poorest boroughs in London. So you could do stuff in the street and it wouldn't get cleaned off.
And then it was like the whole place became a wall of fame.
Me and Banksy, we painted all the posters that used to go on Shoreditch Bridge upstairs in the Dragon Bar. You know, we'd go there, we'd cut stencils, make posters, and then 2 o'clock in the morning when we were pissed enough, go out and jump over railway bridges and paint stuff.
Armies of rats, monkeys and other images started to appear all over London, a new type of visual language that became part of the fabric of the East End and which locals came to associate with a single mysterious name.
It's about underground culture, the things that come up from the sewers. Like most people, I have a fantasy that all the little powerless losers will gang up together, that all the vermin will get some good equipment and then the underground will go overground and tear this city apart.
They'd be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go out and paint some rats. It's like, yeah, we'll come, look out and help you paint, and yeah. It was just like, yeah, get some cans of beer from the kebab shop and off on your bikes and cycle around, and it was just fun. It was like really like innocent and naive and just fun. We were literally just having a laugh. I don't think maybe Banksy did, maybe he had more of a plan than the rest of us, but I don't think any of us really had like, we were just doing it for fun.
It was a really interesting, fun time that was nothing to do with finance or how much money things cost. Like, these guys were just doing it for shits and giggles. It was like, no one at the time thought they were ever going to make any money out of it. They just had something to say.
It reminded me of graffiti. We were running around, stenciling, climbing over bridges. It wasn't about putting your names up there, it was about putting your imagery up there.
It's an interesting mix of traveller, anarchist, punk politics, combined with end of the pier, Mrs. English seaside humour. The jokes are easy to get, but the imagery is accessible and digestible.
Very palatable to the everyday person to walk by and say, oh, okay.
Because you don't choose your audience if you're putting work on the street. The work is talking to people of all classes, all creeds, all colours, all religions, all ages.
It didn't make people feel stupid. The trouble with a lot of art, galleries, museums, I think it intimidates people. And this was something that was easy to get and people could understand and felt that it belonged to them. This is ours. We're not made to feel stupid. For the first time, I can like art.
It's that juxtaposition of iconic imagery that many times we took for granted. You put that over here, you're gonna say this about it, and then it's like, okay, now we almost have like this tension-filled conversation that you just can't walk by. Now you gotta stop. Now you gotta, think about it. And you didn't have to pay for it.
There are jokes always, like the sign saying designated graffiti area or designated riot area. It makes you laugh and it makes you think about the issue he's raised.
In Banksy's work, there's a lot of imagery related to innocence. There's often children, there's often nature, animals, things that we associate with people or things that need to be cared for.
Banksy has a pretty wide repertoire of recurring figures in his work. The mice, they're typically engaged in some weird hijinks.
Apes also frequently appear. They're often shown to be kind of smarter, more interesting than humans, that they will probably take over once we've finished screwing up the whole world and destroying it.
The kids, I think, show the precociousness that exists, the joy that exists, the sort of naivete, the fun that can still exist in the world, and how children sometimes are oblivious or even smarter than the adults. They're a very important piece of his work and really communicate really strong messages about where we are as a society.
Then policemen often appear too. They're shown as figures of authority who should be questioned, but they're also shown sympathetically, people who are in roles of authority that sometimes they feel a conflict with. I'm thinking also of the two policemen kissing, and that being something to think about policemen in a different way maybe than we sometimes do. He is wanting to uphold the beauty and power and selfhood of the everyday person in contrast to institutional systems that are kind of weighing things down and controlling things.
The street art scene arrived at a time when the established contemporary art world had to some extent lost its way. British art and culture had thrived during the 90s. The Conservative government of the poll tax and the Criminal Justice Act had been swept away by the wave of optimism that carried Tony Blair into office, and the phrase "Cool Britannia" was coined to capture the sense of pride in British culture, music, film and fashion.
It was all happening in Britain. There was a new spirit, a new confidence and youthful energy.
For you as well.
Britain was swinging again. Almost like a replay of the 60s, go-getting, like we're going to take over the world, you know.
The contemporary art scene was dominated by the so-called Young British Artists, or YBAs, a loose grouping of insurgent artists led by Damien Hirst and celebrated as daring and rebellious iconoclasts. But by the early 2000s, Cool Britannia had burned itself out, and the YBA's luster had faded. Big money had moved in, and for many, it was hard to escape the feeling that normal service had been resumed.
1,000,006. The art world is the biggest joke going. It's a rest dome for the overprivileged, the pretentious and the weak. And modern art is a disgrace. Never had so many people used so much stuff and taken so long to say so little. Still, the plus side is it's probably the easiest business in the world to walk into with no talent and make a few bucks.
The young British artist had become the establishment. Hirst started off as a revolutionary. He was now the establishment.
Damien, Sarah and Angus all showed together in a seminal show in 1988 called Freeze. 16 years later, they're exhibiting together, but at Tate Britain rather than in a warehouse.
We're no longer YBAs, we're OAPs.
Art had become glamorous, become fashionable. Charles Saatchi's gallery made it into an important source of money for artists, and something had to crack in this because this is not what art is supposed to be all about. And what came out from it was street art.
Street art was always really good at being the little cheeky chappy doing that little thing behind your back. Oh, it's kind of funny. Oh, he's having a pop at the government. Your older brother was into Damien Hirst, and your younger brother who's necking pills and going raving is into Banksy.
The art world completely ignore it because it's a populist art form. And I think the art world hate that. Populism isn't a bad thing. It doesn't mean something that's crass and shit. Sometimes it just means that people like it. This was like a movement that became powerful through the people, not through museums and galleries and curators. This was driven by a general love of the art form by the general population.
I'm frustrated by many things, but trying to get accepted by the art world isn't one of them. This seems difficult for people to understand. You do not paint graffiti in the vain hope that one day some big fat Tory will discover you and put your pictures on his wall. If you draw on walls in public, then you are already operating on a higher level.
But whereas the YBAs had benefited from studios, galleries, grants and patrons, London street artists had few resources beyond the beer-stained floor of the Dragon Bar. For Banksy, a friendship that he had formed with photographer and fellow Bristolian Steve Lazarides soon became key to promoting his art.
Steve Lazarides was vital to Banksy's career for a time. What they did was show that you didn't have to have a gallery, be attached to a gallery, to be a well-known, successful artist. They could make their own gallery. They could attract people to it through various means that Lazarides was absolutely king at. What Lazarides did with Banksy was to establish a new way of getting art to the public.
The do-it-yourself ethos of the graffiti and free party scenes carried over to the project of building a system for the sale and exhibition of street art. One of the first installments came in the winter of 2002 with Santa's Ghetto, an exhibition of work by Banksy and Eine that went on to become an annual event.
We'd been painting stuff on the street, and I think some of us had websites, so we were aware of an interest in people that wanted to consume or buy what we were doing, but we didn't really have anything for sale or way of selling it. So we did a Santa's Ghetto party, and yeah, the first one was upstairs at the Dragon Bar. A friend of ours, Marcus, was the drunk, horrible, stinky Santa in the corner. And yeah, we sold everything for like 50 quid or something.
It was completely anarchic. I was walking through Shoreditch from the offices to the Dragon Bar with like handfuls of Banksy prints that would now be worth, you know, millions of pounds. Just taking them up there, and then yeah, I kind of ran it and sold it, and it was completely mental.
Take over a building and don't turn it into an art gallery. You know, just anti-art gallery, anti kind of like establishment, you know. And yeah, going back to that punk kind of like ethic.
We were selling the multiple canvases. So at the time, it cost 250 quid. So a Girl in Blue was £250 for a canvas. And he painted them all in the upstairs of where we were. So we had like 25 canvases laid out. As he was spraying them, like I was numbering them, then he'd sign them, and then we'd take them downstairs and sell them as we were going out. So, and that was the whole idea really in those early days, was to make, again, like affordable art for people.
And public interest in the movement was soaring. Work that in earlier times might have been seen only by a handful of people who passed it on the street could now be preserved and shared online, greatly enhancing the profile of the artist. Banksy was clearly emerging as the most prominent of the street artists at a time when youth culture was turning its face against governments on both sides of the Atlantic and protesting the war on terror and invasion of Iraq. Banksy's anti-war, anti-authority agitprop chimed with the popular mood.
The war was very important to Banksy's development. The no war or wrong war arts very much came from that period. There was a perception that New Labour and Tony Blair had let down the generation, the post-Thatcher generation, the same people running society, and Banksy and his generation, I think, very much came out of that. There's a real distrust.
I think you could see a lot of the spirit of that 80s and 90s underground scene in a lot of his earlier political work, definitely. And that's for me what struck an accord with the vast majority of the British public who tapped into the Banksy phenomenon, was that spirit.
He was able to articulate a lot of things that, you know, people were thinking, but not having the, say, wherewithal or the tools or the ingenuity to say, you know, this is what it is.
In the summer of 2003, Banksy staged his breakthrough exhibition, Turf War, a collection of his street work, sculpture, and vandalised live animals, some of which were painted in homage to graffiti folklore.
Cattle, pigs and sheep are the latest raw material for this man. He calls himself Banksy, but that's not his real name. He's a graffiti artist, and he believes that anonymity is essential.
I disguise because, you know, you can't really be a graffiti writer and then go public. And, you know, it's like the two things don't quite go together. No.
The event caused a sensation in London, with celebrities jostling to get in, and the media crowning Banksy the UK's most feted underground artist.
The Turf War show was hilarious. It was like in this huge squat up on Kingston Road. And the thing with Banksy is, like, even in those early shows, like wherever he did it and whatever period, they were always like supremely well attended. It was like, it was just chaotic.
There were queues outside, models trying to get in, everyone trying to get in. And the RSPCA was tipped off that he was being cruel to animals.
Banksy fears not the critics, but the inspector from the RSPCA who's come to see if the animals are being maltreated. The farmer from Somerset who owns the animals has no qualms, but will the animal welfare man agree?
The artist and the farmer have assured me that they've been painted using animal identification sprays, which is non-toxic, washes off very easily, so there's going to be no harm done, even if the animal licks itself.
It's hard to make an entertaining picture at the best of times, but at least if you have something that kind of wanders around and licks its nose and urinates in front of you, then it's going to make the picture a bit more interesting, right?
Despite having a proper exhibition like this, Banksy insists he's still a graffiti artist.
That graffiti artist trying to climb into the pound to spray the cow and trying to explain to him that it wasn't actually spray paint on it, it was animal dye. And then we had a animal rights protester that came up and chained herself to the scaffolding. What she didn't know, that all we had to do was kind of undo the thing and slide our handcuffs off. But we left it there all day because we thought it was a good look. You know, we give her some food and some drink and everything else. And then she quite politely at the end of the day kind of packed up and went off. That was the one really that kind of kicked off that kind of big show mentality with like multiple things going on. You know, you had pigs, you had sheep, you had cows, you had two vans up on top of each other in a squat in the middle of nowhere. It was only on for 3 days and thousands of people turned up.
This was the exhibition that established him, that meant that street art was a phenomenon that had to be recognised.
He just had like this great vision to be able to put on shows that weren't in white-walled spaces and to show people that art could be viewed in a different way. And I think, yes, on that level, I think he was one of the forerunners to do those kind of shows. But at that point in time, it wasn't even a movement. It was just, you know, it was just us running around doing stuff.
That was about to change with the founding of Pictures on Walls, another step in the reimagining of the art economy. A print house started by the artist Jamie Hewlett, Banksy and Steve Lazarides. With Eine as the printer, Pictures on Walls aim to bring together street artists from around the world and make their work accessible to the general public.
I went to pick Banksy up from Bristol and he diverted me and we went to some print place to pick up some prints. So it was a stack of the rude copper prints. And I'm like, so what are you going to do with them? So I'm taking them to the Anarchist book fair and I'm going to sell them for $5 each. And I was just like, well, you're an idiot. I'll buy them. I'll sell them for 20 quid. Come on, let's see, you know, we can do better with it than that. And then, you know, he kind of came up with the concept of Pictures on Walls. And again, the whole ethos for Pictures on Walls was to make cheap, affordable art for the masses.
I was always into the American screen print system, whereby you'd have like artists like Frank Kozak and Coop that would design gig posters for Beastie Boys, Nirvana. And every time the Beastie Boys did a gig, as they toured across America, there would be a poster that you could buy for 30 quid. People were producing these really affordable, fucking cool, what I consider to be cool, pieces of art by people that I consider to be artists, and you could buy them really, really cheap. And the only screen prints available that you could get in England were like for high art. And I wanted to try to do something that was more based on the American gig poster system. And that was kind of the idea behind Pictures on Walls when we started it.
And again, in that kind of not knowing what we were doing. So, you know, we were making print runs of like 600 and 750, not knowing that that wasn't really considered a limited edition. But, you know, still went on and did it and then started sucking in other artists to work on it as well, like Invader, Mode 2. So then, like, everyone got involved and suddenly it was like a focal point for the movement about, like, picking people to come and do print.
You know, no one was earning money back then, so, you know, you do a print with Pictures on Walls, you could earn like, you know, $6 grand, you know, which was a lot of money back then. So I saw it as a way whereby I could make these artists money and do something that I thought was kind of like quite important and showcase their work. And the first print I did was a print by an artist from Norway called Dolk, and it was a Labrador fucking R2-D2. Really highbrow stuff we were doing back then.
Although simple in concept, Banksy and Lazarides' activities were, at the time, revolutionary. The street art movement had managed to bypass all the established structures for producing, exhibiting, and selling works of art, and as Lazarides established himself as an art dealer, Banksy's became increasingly valuable properties.
Banksy's pretty good at kind of like working people and getting into different crowds and different scenes. You know, Jude Law, and all of a sudden Jude Law was coming down and giving us 10 grand for painting. Also drug dealers at that point, they were great people to buy art. There was loads of cash. They thought this art movement was cool. They, you know, they understood it a lot more than the YBAs. It was affordable. And we were the cheeky little shits running around London. And people want to buy into that.
We had no idea what we were doing. Pricing-wise, I just made it up as we went along. So my theory was, if someone had 500 quid, they probably got 1,500. So if we did something at 500 quid and it sold out, next time round, it would be 1,500. And then it was like, well, if they got 15, then they might have 5. And it just jumped like that. And it, you know, and in the end, when it started to get to like tens of thousands of pounds, I could only do it if I didn't say the full amount that the piece cost. It's like, oh Christ, if I tell them it's 15 grand, I'm just gonna burst out laughing. And it's like, yeah, mate, it's 15. We made it quite difficult for people to buy pieces. And like I said, it was like, I had no plan. I never wanted to open a gallery. It was just, we just made it up.
That winter, Banksy entered Tate Britain, placed a painting on the wall, and walked into the history books. With the incursions in museums and galleries, and other stunts that followed, Banksy pioneered a new type of illegal performance art. And in doing so, he began to transcend the street art scene.
What really set him up was his interventions in galleries in New York, London and Paris. That suddenly gave him the publicity that was needed to make him into an artist that everyone knew who he was.